Now, you might wonder, what is CSP? Now, some of you may know what is CSP, and some of you may not know what is CSP. So I'm just going to put this here, cloud service provider. Okay, so CSP is your cloud service provider. Let me just put this one nice little color here as well. So this is your CSP, and CSP means cloud service provider, which means they provide services. And you cannot just call any cloud company a CSP. CSP, similar to the cloud, you cannot just call any kind of a hosting as a cloud. Similarly, you can't just call simply any cloud service provider, right? I mean, we have seen the different types of services. There are SaaS services out there, right? So you can't just simply call all these different, one-off service provider as a CSP or cloud service provider. When we say we're talking about the host of services, it has to be provided. So first and foremost, what it should provide is the range of services which we can glue services together to form architecture, right? You might know about 3-tier architecture, 4-tier architecture, N-tier architecture, right? So how do you do that? By putting different services together, and that's how you get that. So you should be able to put or chain these services together to form a cloud architecture or the application end-to-end architecture, all the services that you want. There are so many services you can start from the DNS. For example, let's say, you connect to google.com, right? So google.com is a very friendly name, right? Something that you can remember. Like I can remember, you can remember, all the humans can remember, because it's very friendly name, and that's what you have to think of your domain. Something that people can remember. It's easy to pronounce, easy to remember, and easy to call as well. So google.com is what for the end user, right? But for a technician person or for an IT person, you have to understand what's happening behind the scene. When you select something like this, you have to bear in mind that your machine, the machine who does all the processing, who only understands the binary at this moment, should be able to understand what the google.com is. So there is a way to get to that part, right? So communication on the network, everything happens through the socket, right? So one thing about that. So let me just put that here, maybe. So communication on the network happens with the socket, and socket is nothing but your IP address and port. Now, when you connect to google.com, and if it's a secure connection, which is a HTTPS, then that's your 443, right? That's the port we have. And remembering all these ports, these are oftentimes asked in the interviews, right? They might ask you about the ports of the HTTP and this and that and all other services. So I'm just going to write it down, because these are your bread and butter, right? So you should be able to remember all this. So 443, that's for HTTPS, and HTTP is 80. So that's your port. Now, where do you get the IP from, right? Because the google.com, okay, fine, it's HTTPS, then we know it's a port 443, or if it's just a plain HTTP unsecure website, then it's going to be 80. Now, where do you get the IP from, right? So this is where somebody called DNS who's going to resolve your name into IP address. Now, I just want to give you, not just google.com won't be converted into IP straight away. Now, there's a few hops, right? There might be more than that, but we're just going to touch base upon two, because, that's the majority of the time the case going to be. So let's say you have a google.com. Google.com is a friendly name, right? And in the computer terms, we call that friendly name CNAME or canonical name. So this thing, what you have will be, there will be a CNAME entry, right? A canonical name, which is going to convert this friendly name. That's a job of your DNS. Let me just bring this up and bring this up a little, right? The CNAME now will be converted into something called hostname, right? Hostname, if you've logged into your computer, or if you have logged into Linux servers, you can run the simply command called hostname, and you can see the hostname. So that CNAME will give you hostname. But Again, we're talking about IP. We're not talking about host name, right? So let me just put that down here. Okay. And maybe I can bring these guys here. I don't know why this arrow won't fit into the right place. Okay, now it did. And I'm just gonna put this here. And okay, so you got a host name, but we still need IP. We don't need host name, right? How do we get that? So the next record, what we have, this is a CNAME record, by the way. So I'm just gonna say that. And this is a DNS type of the record. But the whole point here is to put it because when you work for a project, you have to deal with this, right? And there are different topics, right? We have a different services. In AWS for the DNS, we have our Route 53, and we'll be talking more about the DNS and all of this record types. But I wanted to plant the idea at the beginning. So you get a thought process and you start thinking about it from the day one, right? So that's how things are happening because these are very much relatable. A user would know that, okay, google.com would be converted into some kind of IP, but an engineer should understand the what's happening behind the scene. It's not just a straight away plain simple conversion of your google.com into some kind of IP. There's this process that's going on, right? So you have to understand there is a CNAME, which is a more friendly name, and then the CNAME is converted to the host name because you cannot create a CNAME entry against the IP address. And then once you get that IP address, then there will be another record, which is a record or alias record, which is A and AA is for your IPv6. This guy now is going to give you the IP address. And so let me just say that, put it here. All right. So this will return the IP address, and that's what your network is going to use to form a socket. And you'll get a socket, and you already know the port, right? You create a socket, now you know the IP, and that's how you do that. Now there are so many different records which we will see during the DNS lecture, and we will be for AWS we'll be talking about Route 53. And the name for Route 53 is actually, it's a DNS port, by the way. So port for DNS is 53, and that support, so AWS have used that to just give the name of the service, because creating the routes, it's actually traveling, flowing through the routes. So this is where the name DNS is coming from. All right, so you need a one of these services, right? Now we're talking about gluing those services. This is not what we were talking about. This is just me giving you a side story, side point, so you can better remember this. Right. Now, next thing, once you land to the DNS service to get an IP address, the next thing you do is to connect to a load balancer. Now, this load balancer job is to distribute the traffic, just to make sure that behind the scene you have multitude of servers, and this will redirect your traffic to some kind of a backend server. Right. So you're gonna have a backend server. So you need this one of these service, and then you need another service for the load balancer and another service for this. Next, you can have a different type of the storage. You can have an RDBMS database, and then you can also have some different object storage in different medium of storage to store objects, flat files, and blobs, and other things. You can also need a monitoring service, right? You can also need some kind of analytics if you want to perform that. So let me just put that as well. Warehousing and analytics. So you need these kind of service as well. And these backend servers probably connecting to all of these, right? So let me just put it here, maybe bring it down so the board looks similar. All right. So this is now a very, very basic, simple architecture, right? Looks like a 3-tier, but I mean, you can name it whatever you want, because now you're just not living in a 3-tier. There is an n-tier. So you can come up with any tiers you want, with especially with the advent of microservices and the cloud. There are so many different tiers now you have. Okay, so this is what you should be able to do it when when you say something that is a CSP, because these are the different services your CSP is providing, and you are able to put all these services together. You are chaining them, or you are gluing them, sticking them together to form architecture. And this is the architecture. This is the blueprint what we have created, right? So this is what you should be able to do it. If you want to call any cloud platform as a CSP, because you have to pay, you have to be very careful when you say that. You have to be very careful when you say cloud, because you can't just say simply any hosting service is a cloud unless it has those five attributes. Similarly, you can't simply call anything as a CSP if you don't have those different characteristics within them. All right. So the next, and which is a very important service, infrastructure as a service. Now, if you're going to call any CSP, you know, uh, any cloud platform or any cloud company as a cloud service provider, it has to also provide infrastructure as a service. Now, this is very important. This is actually what made cloud what cloud is today. Otherwise, there were so many different products, SaaS-based products and PaaS-based products were already there in the market. But infrastructure, when the service of the infrastructure started, I mean, that was the big turning point into the cloud market. And cloud from ever since, it is just moving upward. It's boom. And infrastructure as a service, these are the services are most used on any other cloud, because this was the groundbreaking invention. This was something people didn't imagine. People questioned it when they even just came up with the idea, right? So Amazon did something which nobody could imagine or could think, and now because they did it first, they are the leader. And so you should be able to do that. You should be able to do this as well. Now, these are the very main important building blocks, or where main components where, a cloud company can qualify themselves as a CSP. Now, others are fairly straightforward. You should have the API similar to, unified API access. You should have it similar to, we've seen in the cloud feature as well. And then you should also have monitoring features built in, and you should also be able to use in infrastructure automation, right? IC. Now, IC, infrastructure automation, which means anything that you are able to create with the API, that's your infrastructure, right? This is what the Terraform says. Now, something I've already told you guys during the Terraform lecture, right? That HashiCorp says anything that you can create with the API, that is your infrastructure. So when you do anything with the API, you should be able to use a service like IAC within the cloud to automate all your infrastructure provisioning and infrastructure creation. And then you should also be able to measure these services. Right. When we say measure, we're just talking about the billing. It should be per second, per minute, sort of a billing. It should not be a license which is assigned to you for a product. Now, regardless if you want to use it or not, you're just gonna have to pay for it. Like, for example, when you buy an enterprise Terraform, you're gonna get a license as per workspaces. Now, whether you use those workspaces or you don't use those workspaces, it really doesn't matter. You have to pay for it. So it's not a per usage, pay as you go sort of usage. There's no metered billing. There's no service that you can measure. You just have to buy it, right? Similar to what you used to do on the on-prem when we talked about, how the stuff on the on-prem is, you just have to commit, right? And similarly for, now HashiCorp has a cloud. HashiCorp can call themselves as a cloud platform, but they cannot simply call them as a cloud service provider. Now, all these things that I've posted here, as a part of the CSP definition, these are all opinionated. And over time, these are subject to change. So today, these are the things qualifies a company as a cloud service provider, but tomorrow it might be something else, right? There might be some addition or some subtraction. So keep an eye on that and also pay attention to that as well. Don't just stick to this, because over time this might change and there might be some addition and some removal of all of these. Now, other than that, any other service that that provide some kind of a cloud services, and most of the companies are actually going to provide you a SaaS based services, like the Gmail account, like a GitHub or GitLab. These are all the SaaS based product, right? So even though they're Atlassian's product like Jira and all those you have, so these are also a cloud based services. One of the type of the cloud service, right? So we have seen the different types of the cloud. We've seen so many types of the cloud, and that's one of the cloud service they are providing. But they cannot call, or they don't qualify as a CSP. They're simply gonna be called as a cloud platform. So at the top, I'm just gonna put Heroku, because It's very famous within the developers world because it gives you a platform as a services where you don't need to really worry about your infrastructure setup and all those things. You only concentrate on the coding and just deploy your application without having to worry about any of the infrastructure component, the user management, security, and all those sort of things, right? So you have company like Heroku, SAP, Atlassian, HashiCorp, of course, our favorite because we are using a lot of our HashiCorp product, Salesforce, and many more, right? There are so many different companies you can think of. Any company that doesn't provide all of these services, all of these services, all of these some different types of component that we've discussed, then you're simply going to call them cloud platform. You're not going to call them a cloud service provider because cloud service provider should be able to facilitate all the components that we have discussed about, or that's something I've showed you, right? So that's what the cloud is. And